Hey guys, so for this piece, I wanted to try recreating a Hearthstone card on a real-life canvas using acrylic paints to color it. I chose Razorpetal Lasher because it's not only a very generic monster to draw, it's just a plant with a few tentacles and just a petal blooming, and it's also within my skill level. I knew I could easily transfer this card over into like a physical medium. And it's also one of my favorite Hearthstone cards in general. I used to play it all the time when Ongoro came out and Miracle Rogue. And then Keleseth came out and every 2-drop became garbage. That's another thing entirely. Right around here, when I was starting to do the harder outline of the Lasher, I realized that I never actually came up with a background for it. And I needed to start thinking about that because just a Razorpetal Lasher with no background is going to look ugly, and I didn't really want to copy the entire Ungoro plant life background. So I decided to just go with the Hearthstone board itself, as if you were looking down and you were actually playing the game. This would be what you would see. You would see your opponent playing a Razorpetal Lasher, and behind it would be the health of your opponent, their hero power, their cards. Now, as to which Hearthstone board I chose, I decided to go with the One Night in Karazhan expansion board. Because it was one of my funnest times playing Hearthstone was during the Karazhan expansion. Because, well, I played Shaman, so it was an easy time for me. And it was also a very simple one with just generic, a stage, a barrel. It was very easy to copy over. I chose the basic Hearthstone card back because it's not only the easiest to draw, but it's also the most identifiable, which is fun with that. Now here, looking at the intricate designs of the Hearthstone card back, that was honestly the hardest part to draw about all this. I kind of like haphazardly drew the stage itself because it's not that complex and doesn't have that many details, but actually drawing each individual card back was pretty difficult, and I'm still not totally happy with how it came out. I could redo it if I really wanted to. Well, I do want to, but I'm gonna go through all the trouble now. Now, as to the actual painting, I just decided to just go really basic with the actual Hearthstone board. Because if you play the game, you realize there's nothing there. It's just dirt. I think it's a kind of dirt. And I just tried to do little specks of darker or lighter brown, tan, khaki, just to give it a sense of depth, right? I decided not to add anything on the foreground because there really isn't anything there. I could have had like what would be your perspective, your creature, on the board, but I realized it would just seem cluttered, and the focal point of the piece was the Lasher itself, not necessarily what you were playing. Here, I did a little thing where I gave it a shadow, like I gave the Lasher a shadow, which is something that the creatures in Hearthstone don't have, since it's just like an oval indicator taking place of a monster when you play the game. I am not that happy with it, but it gives it a little more realistic look, as if you were actually playing the Hearthstone game in front of you. Now, translating the 2D board where the hero portrait is into this was really tricky, and I kind of just took the entire hero portrait out. I kept the life total and I kept the hero power because that's kind of like what you would be able to interact with during the game. But if you were playing this in the Hearthstone universe, you wouldn't have a hero portrait. It would just be you. It would be the player. So I just removed them entirely and just filled that spot with the cards. I decided to give the your opponent starting health of 30. They haven't taken any damage because they just played a Razorpetal Lasher on an empty board, so it's probably turn 2 and you haven't taken any damage. So that's why you did 30 instead of like a arbitrary number of like 22, 16. Because this is where most likely your opponent has 4 cards in hand, usually around turn 2. Now, when I actually got into painting the Lasher itself, I tried really hard using watered down acrylic paint to have it be very fluid, like each color just blended into each other, giving a sense of just a texture. Not so much just a flat static color like I used on the stage, which never changes, never moves. With the Lasher, the light is actually interacting with it. So I just very, very watered down mixtures of purple, pink, and a little bit of red to do it. I added some light for the highlights. But I'm very proud as to how this shading came through, because I've never really attempted something this watered down. Usually when I paint with acrylics, it's very thick, very flat coloring. This is my first attempt of ever actually like adding a fluidity to my colors. Right here, I used just a solid black, very watered down, on the darker parts of the plant. This way I could just paint over it, and that black will darken the hue of the paints a little bit to represent a shade without having to just mix in the black with the paint itself on my easel. Not easel. You know, where I mix the paints. I do this for each of the legs and each of the arms, just to give a sense of depth. Now, if there's anything in this entire piece that I'm not really happy with how it turned out, it would be the painting of the Razorpetal's thorns themselves, because I couldn't get the right color. It was supposed to be a bone, like darkened white kind of color, and it ended up just coming out like a brown, like a very faded white brown color that didn't really look good against the khaki background. So it's kind of just like a muddled color there that I'm not really that happy with. But I couldn't change it at that point, and I couldn't find the color. I just didn't have it in my skill set to find the correct color. For the background, I was considering just adding in like a literal character, like drawing in a little abstract, not abstract, but a very basic Jaina or Valera, very abstract Valera in the background. But I realized that would take the focus away from the Razorpetal Lasher, which is what's supposed to be the focus of the paint. So I just added in a gray to black gradient in the background, kind of just keeping the focus on the center of the piece, being the cards, the health total, and the Lasher itself. Now, I left the cards for last because I knew they were going to be really difficult. Finding the shade of blue wasn't particularly that hard. It was just a sky blue mixed with a little bit of blue and just a gray color to get the right shade. I started out just doing the blue first, kind of just to give myself a good idea of where the gold should go. Here I slide going in with one very watered down layer of yellow gold, kind of just so the overall color will stick. You can still see the pencil kind of showing through a little bit. I should have probably erased that beforehand, but good enough for next time. The star shaped was very difficult for me to actually paint, because even though it's a solid golden color, there are no lines separating each piece of the card bag. It's just gold into darker gold into lighter gold to represent depth. I couldn't get it at that scale, and the size of the canvas and just how small each piece was, I couldn't get it to work, so I decided to go over the entire thing with a generic gold and then do a slight shadow using black. Now, as you can see right now, the tips of the hearthstone on the card back are very not uniform and very sloppy. I fixed this by just going over it with blue and just sharpening the edges on each of the little lines. I also filled in that one blue gap that I forgot earlier. Now to finish the piece off, I just grabbed some very bright blue and just colored in the hearthstone, and that was the piece. And overall, I'm very happy with how it turned out, and hopefully I can do this again. Thanks for watching!